Hi there, good morning. This morning we have with us Richard Osborne, who is the founder of the Business Data Group. He's also the Vice President, am I right in saying so, of the Northamptonshire Chamber of Commerce. Richard, is that right?
Yeah, that's it for my sins, yeah.
Good morning, welcome.
Morning.
Thank you for joining us today. We have been on a quest to try and offer guidance to other business owners and provide quality information and discussion that may help business owners in this unprecedented times. And one of the things that I'm really happy to announce is that as of last night, it's 10:30 on Monday the 25th of May. As of last night, we have been accepted under Apple Podcasts, so we're available on iTunes for listening to. So really proud of that. So hopefully that will be able to grow the network of people that we're able to maybe influence and help with. So one of the things that I wanted to do, obviously I know you very well, but I wanted to ask you to introduce yourself and also the Business Data Group for those that don't know you.
Yeah, thank you. So Business Data Group started life actually in about 2007 as a company called e-filing, where we built an e-commerce platform that's now today powers most of the company formation industry. So right. in the UK at the moment, if anybody sets up their own business, they generally will either do it through the gov.uk website direct with Companies House, or they will use a company formation agent, which most of them in the country now run on the e-filing platform.
That's a right. They have their own brand on there and they use your software.
That's right. So members of the public wouldn't even know we exist. But if they went onto Google, for example, and did a search for registering my own company, they'll see a lot of websites that enable them to do that online, and nearly all of them run through our e-filing product. And what that means, though, is that we get an oversight of a lot of information about industry sectors, types of entrepreneurs, and areas of the country where businesses are being set up. So alongside that, we then provide data insights to businesses that are looking to research or find out more information about what is going on in the company startup sector, whether it's a particular industry sector they're interested in, or an area of the country, or just to find out generally what's going on, which has been quite pertinent at the moment.
So I think one of the things, we had a conversation last week, which was not necessarily leading to this, but we both thought it would probably be really good to share this type of information, because it was, one, very interesting and not necessarily what I expected, but two, it's actually quite positive from the way that I reflected upon it after speaking to you. So I appreciate, for those people that are listening, we're going to be very aware of the fact that we're going to show potential stats on screen. So we'll try and talk through those as best as we can. But at the same time, if you're watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn or whatever, you'll be able to see the stats in reality as well. And one of the things I think that probably is worth mentioning is that this is real, live, up-to-date data. This is pulling the data through from Companies House as we speak, to a certain extent. And also, it's not set up, so it's not the fact that, oh well, we want you to believe this out there. So it is exactly what's happening, whether that is what is believed out there in the media or is exceptional to that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. We're in quite a unique position where we were a very early adopter of a new product from Companies House, and in fact we're quite involved with their development team in working on it, which provides us with a live data stream from Companies House's own internal data into our system that enables us to do this. Principally, if somebody sets up a new business, we're able to include that information within our own reporting within a few minutes. So that's what we'll talk through today, and what I'll be happy to share is real, as he just said, very up-to-date information right up until the end of the week.
And if anybody thinks that this type of information would be really useful in assisting their business, should they be contacting you directly? Is it a product or service that you make available?
Yeah, absolutely. The product was actually born out of a request from one of our clients. We work with some high street banks in sort of helping connect them with entrepreneurs. And one of them was going through a challenging time trying to understand what was happening with the economy at this moment during the COVID situation, and asked us some questions of, what is happening across different industry sectors.
Could you interrogate the data and tell us what that comes back with? Yeah.
And all we did at that point was think, well, if they're asking us for this information, it must be useful to other people.
Yeah.
And it enabled us to diversify a little bit further to provide a product, a trend analysis product, which is now out there as part of our portfolio.
Yeah. Well, let's crack on to that. So can we have probably a screen share, if this technically works? So what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and look, Richard, aren't we, into an insight into how COVID-19 has affected business startups. So before COVID, so I think March 23rd, and then as we've gone through it, the data, I suppose, back for the end of March, April, and now the majority of May, where we sit here on the 25th.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll run through it now.
So what's your insight? What's the first sort of area to look at?
Well, what we have here, so what I'll talk through now is really what happened to business startups. So the number of people, entrepreneurs setting up in business, just as we started to come into the COVID environment. So just generally looking, so 2017, the number of startups in the country would generally sit about 8,000 company formations or limited companies being set up a week.
Okay. So the bottom axis on here is week, isn't it? Yeah, 52 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a week by week graph. And it really, although there are peaks and troughs, so during sort of January, February, March, the number of people setting up in business will generally sort of gradually climb up. And then after sort of March time, in sort of April and May, it starts to sort of come down a little bit, and it remains at a consistent-ish level throughout the summer holidays, basically. And then as you come into October and November, it starts to climb up a little bit before dropping off into December. So that's a trend that's been consistent for many, many years.
Yeah.
We then go into 2018 and 2019, and there was quite a significant jump in people setting up limited companies.
So the average there, just for people listening, the average there is then in what, 2018, would you say the average is 12,000 rather than 8,000?
Yeah, that's right. So 2018 saw a sharp rise in the number of entrepreneurs setting up in business, and that remained consistent. So as you just said, about the 12,000-ish a week throughout all of 2018. And 2019 followed a similar trend, sort of going up to maybe about sort of 13,000 a week, 13,500 a week, but not the sort of jump that we saw between 2017 and 2018.
And just to confirm, this is limited companies, isn't it? So if you're setting up a sole trader or a partnership, then that's going to be on top of these figures as well.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, there isn't a database or register of sole traders or partnerships that you can interrogate at the moment. I wish there was, but as it stands at the moment, there isn't. So what we're really looking at is incorporated businesses, so companies set up at Companies House, whether that's through a formation agent, accountant, gov.uk, they all sort of go into one central database.
Okay.
And if we look at 2020 as it started, that followed a similar trend to 2019. So January and February started off looking like it was going to be consistent with 2019 in volume of people setting up in their businesses, until we get to around about the end of February, when it takes a bit of a drop down, and then it sits about that level for a few weeks until it just nosedives. And then sort of the volumes drop down to around about sort of 8,000 again a week, consistent with which we saw in 2017.
Whereas it been sort of 16,000, hasn't it? So it's like half basically within a couple of matter of weeks.
Yeah, and there were sort of key dates that affected that. So when we look at the sort of data behind these sort of drops, The first drop around about the end of February ties in with us when the stock market started to decline. So the FTSE data started to show a drop in numbers, and now where people far more intelligent than myself, who are managing huge portfolios of stock, are sort of preempting what's going on in China in particular around that time, and what effect that would have on their certain markets. And investments started to change into sort of like your gold and sort of tangible assets. The next big drop happened around about week 10 in the UK, and that's where the government announced the work from home advisory. So the Prime Minister went on TV and told everybody they should be working from home if they can.
Yeah.
And that stuck with, that news caused the number of people setting up businesses to drop at a level that I've never seen before. And then the following week, the term lockdown was used. Another announcement was made around about week 11, and we see the downward trend continue to drop. So if we think about the week that work from home advisory was announced, that week about 15,000 companies were registered in the UK. If we go forward 2 weeks, that number dropped to just over 8,000. So literally halved. And then after a little bit of a wobble, continued to go down to, by the point we get to around about week 14, week 15, we're down to about 7,000 companies a week being formed. So a huge drop. It's interesting to note that businesses were still being set up. People were still starting up businesses, but nothing like the level that had been seen for the past couple of years.
Is there just out of interest, is there any reason why, we saw it drop down to the lockdown, then there was a little jump up, or is that for any reason that is understandable?
Bank holiday weekends. Right. So usually that's where you see certain peaks and troughs when you're looking at a week by week basis. You have normally a 5-day week. That's when the register is open for companies to be issued company numbers.
Yeah.
And it's when you have a 4-day week, or in some cases 3-day week, that has a direct impact on the numbers. Yeah. Strangely enough, it's not that they're sort of followed on to the following week. So if you have a 4-day week, the following week you don't have the equivalent of 6 days worth of incorporations go through. It just spreads out evenly.
Yeah. Okay, that makes complete sense. Okay.
Yeah. So that's really how sort of it's amazing when you think about it, all happened within a short space of time. We're not talking months where you can project and plan in normal business terms, looking at months worth of data and making sort of smooth decisions. We're looking at things that literally happened overnight, within weeks. I know everybody keeps using the term unprecedented, but it really is the impact, where you can see where the media and the government were trying to respond so rapidly, with saying the government, for example, bailout packages. When you're seeing numbers like this just drop so quickly, so many people, myself included, started thinking this sort of graph was going to continue to just go down and down and down. There wasn't we couldn't see at this point any sort of gradual easing off. It was constantly just dropping. And it's all just said within a few weeks.
I mean, with hindsight, that doesn't shock me. That doesn't surprise me, or probably anyone listening or anything, that it's gone down in that time of maybe 2 weeks. It's gone down, well, less than half. Other people had other things to worry about other than setting companies up. It's all what's the right word? It's all understandable that doesn't shock me in any way, because that makes sense. People are going to be doing other things, and making sure they've got a livelihood rather than necessarily concentrating on growth and new ideas and stuff like that. And I also think, secondly, that would I be fair to say, Richard, that this is probably similar to most countries across the world?
I would expect it to be so, yeah. I mean, for us, we have UK data, but I wouldn't expect it to be any different in any other countries.
Yeah.
And with what you're saying, you know, in hindsight, it's true. No, when we look at like the 2007-8 recession, credit crunch, and look at data from previous recessions, even though a recession was happening, the level of people setting up in businesses, although dropped slightly during different parts, you know, different periods of time, nothing like this, because we've never been told to lock down. We've never been told to keep off the streets.
Yeah.
And when you've got a recovery package, which includes furlough support, job retention, if you're trying to make a decision, am I going to set up my own business and lose any access to support, or am I going to stay where I am? So at the worst case, I get 80% of my salary paid up to so on. When you think about protecting your mortgage, your family, and so on, that's the most sensible option. So it makes sense that the furlough scheme was announced very early on. So if you're somebody thinking of starting a business, and you could, during that decline, that period of time from sort of week 10 to week 14, 15, there was no idea really where it was going, what was happening. It was just, I mean, if you think about the media as well, it was a lot of doom and gloom. And I mean, generally, I mean, there are hard hit businesses on there. So if we look at the licensed pubs and restaurants trade, and we then plot this graph heading forward to sort of week 19, week 20, so we start heading into May sort of data, the number of people setting up within the licensed pub and restaurant trade are down to sort of where they were, if we go back to sort of February time, around 600 pubs and restaurants being set up a week. And we compare that to where we're currently around about 200 now. It dropped down to about 150, and it sort of recovered slightly. And I would sort of hazard a guess, we're looking at sort of preemptive registration startups, people sort of planning ahead. You know, they can't open, to put it bluntly. You know, pubs are not allowed to open. A lot of restaurants are not allowed to open for seated diners. And I use that term intentionally for a moment. So there are sectors that are hard hit.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you can see, can't you, on this, that, so for those people listening, you know, we've got a spike, I think, in the last 3 years. So in 2017, 18 and 19, there's been a spike, almost seems, you know, standard. There's a bit of a spike in week 10 and 11. And it completely, for obvious reasons, it completely went the other way, didn't it? So, you know, whereas you could say that there was probably an average in 2017 of 300 a week.
I'd probably say it's near, because if you average it out, when you look towards the end of 2017, it started to grow quite a bit.
350,
maybe. So about 350-ish sort of thing.
And then in 2018,
18, 19, it's staying consistent around about the 500, 550. But it's always quite a high growth area to the start of the year when you look at.
And it had been quite a good year, hadn't it? From the 2020 data we can see there, you know, you could say that the average out is maybe 600, 620 across the first 9, 10 weeks of the year. And then it's just then plummeted, hasn't it? Immediately to you know, down to 150 odd. Yeah,
that's and when you look at all the underlying data, it's of no surprise, particularly how that sector, that is a sector that has been really hardest hit beyond any other sector. So you know, I've spent some time looking through the data for different businesses, and I haven't found anything comparable to this. But what's really, when you look through all the types of businesses setting up, and we start to look at the UK as a whole, though, one of the interesting things, if we sort of go on to like the next slide, and when you collect all businesses together, what's interesting is when you look at the last 2 weeks in particular, which is sort of week 2021, the number of companies being set up is exactly tallying along with 2018 and 2019.
And also back to pre-COVID.
Yeah,
It's almost
Yeah,
almost sort of
you've got,
taken a U shape, hasn't it? It's sort of gone down and then back up to exactly where it was before, which is incredibly encouraging.
yeah, so you start to look around about week 14, 15 of this year, and you can picture a mindset for entrepreneurs where an entrepreneur isn't somebody who gets held down. I'd use that definitely. They're the kind of people, there's a particular mindset of entrepreneurs where if there are challenges in front of them, they will naturally look to find ways around that. And we've had a period of about a month where everything's been at the rock bottom when we look at sort of round about sort of the end of March into the beginning of April time. And then you start to see a gradual increase in the number of businesses being set up.
Yeah.
And then it climbs straight back up to when you're starting to look into sort of May, where we are now. And we're back to as you just said, pre-COVID numbers, where the number of people setting up in business is, if for the people who can see the graph, you can see the lines are on top of each other for 2018, 2019, and now 2020.
Yeah, same number of companies being formed every week as the last 2 years now.
Yeah, so we're back up to sort of round about, for this time of year, around about the 14,000 businesses a week being registered. Which,
like you say, there's definitely been a real significant spike, hasn't there, in the last couple of weeks? Yeah. Do you think that there is a reason for that? Is that because of the fact, what immediately comes to mind to me is that because that the government put some sort of roadmap together, we are starting to see that, we're not gonna, this isn't a temporary thing, and we're going to have to find new ways of working in the long term. So therefore, people have then started to go, right, okay, actually, we need to now really start doing something about it.
I think there's an aspect of that. I also think we can look to other countries and the timeframes where they've been in lockdown and started to move out of lockdown. So we have a window of time that somebody who's trying to make some plans can look at and think, right, China had this period of time, Italy had that period, and so on. And we can start thinking, okay, well, it's just natural that UK is going to follow, not too dissimilar from that, and follow that same sort of time frame. Yeah. So we know how long lockdown is roughly going to last. We also had a period of time where people can look at and say, well, these were my plans. This is how I was going to run my business. It's going to be a bit different now. So how could I change my business plan to adapt to what is happening now? And they've been able to do that, and then look at, right, with that change of strategy, I can still launch my business.
Yeah,
there's going to be an aspect of people who may have been made redundant, who have, and that does, whether it's any recession, does lead to a collection of people who have decided, well, I'm going to take this opportunity to start my own business. There is some aspect of that, I believe.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think it's the mindset, the entrepreneurial mindset, where you're sort of looking and thinking, right, I'm going to adapt. My business plan was this, it's now going to be that. We've got a time frame to look at now from other countries that gives me an idea of when things should start to return to some form of whatever normality or new normal we've got. And we're in that sort of window now of about 3 months. You don't start a business with the plan for everything to happen the following day. You start a business to start putting your framework in place to get ready to trade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting and really positive. I didn't think it would be that gradient. I didn't think it would be that steeper gradient, which is really encouraging.
From my experience of people that speak to about this, that's not an unusual thought to have. As soon as people start to see actually how many businesses are back on track and registering and starting, people don't expect to see it already, but this is the stats that we are pulling in on a daily basis from the whole of the UK and pulling together. And
are you finding that there's certain industries that these startups are coming from? I mean, my common sense for what I have of it would say that there'll be technology-based type companies is rather than necessarily hospitality or something like that. Is there a way of interrogating that data, Richard?
Yeah. So that's part of what's the purpose, what we've been doing behind this. There's a belief there was that although the volume of businesses starting up has increased back to what it's been for the past few years, so we're back on track, that there'll be a change in dynamic of kind of businesses. Anybody we spoke to, any clients that approached us, really had any evidence to back that up. And really what they were looking for is for that evidence to try and look behind these data and see, well, it's always been this kind of market. These are all the types of businesses that have always been starting up. Is it still the same? Because logically it might not be. So if we go back, and where we was talking about the licensed trade earlier, so pubs and restaurants seeing a huge decline. One of the first things we thought we'd look at is some of the data behind pubs and restaurants and that sort of hospitality sector as a whole. And if we look at mobile food outlets, where we sort of look at this sort of graph that I've just put in front of us now, we start at the start of the year, where around about 500 mobile food outlets, so these sort of like your pop-up takeaways and so forth, we're starting up at about 500 a week across the whole of the UK. And during the decline we spoke about earlier, that dropped down to about 200. So it tracked alongside the licensed food and beverage trade.
Yeah.
But now, if we look at the last few weeks, again, we're seeing a huge, sharp rise over the past few weeks. And we're back at around, almost 500 a week for the past couple of weeks. And if you look at 2019 and 2018's data, we're above that. Albeit, 1 week we're sort of tracking alongside 2018 volumes. But if we look at 2019, where that was around about 350 a week, and we're up at nearly 500 a week now. And I'd envisage that volume continuing forward over the next few weeks. So that industry has seen a change where sort of food and beverage is recovering, but one part of it is now. So is that a sign of a sector diversifying? It's very early to say, but there is still there. So if we think about what this could mean for certain sectors, so let's say take card acquiring, for example. If you're a card acquirer as a business, you would naturally think that hospitality is a sector that's, don't speak to these people, they're in a lot of trouble. But actually, you need to go beyond hospitality as a sector in itself and look down below that and start thinking about, well, what individual aspects of that sector. And here we're looking at mobile food outlets as a industry sector, which I said, would cover your sort of your pop-ups, your takeaways, sort of kind of sectors there. And here we're seeing that as a subsection of hospitality has recovered in the volume of startups to a level beyond what we've seen in previous years.
And it all makes sense, doesn't it? But at the same time, I think you're right. Rather than necessarily just not looking at, food and beverage as an industry, is breaking that down and say, okay, well, you can't just tar the whole industry with that brush. People are clearly adapting and diversifying and, dealing with the demand that's out there. Yeah.
And then you're also thinking about businesses that are diversifying. So if we look at manufacturing, now a lot of white papers or sort of political announcements will generally look at manufacturing as a measure of our GDP, our economic strength. And here, if we look at manufacturing as a sector as a whole, we can see that it started the year for the last 3 years, this year in the past, 2018-19, has tracked around 650 to sort of 700 businesses a week starting up in the manufacturing kind of sector. And that dropped down to around about sort of 2017 levels as COVID started to take a hold.
Which are, those people listening, that's back down to sort of 300 a week, isn't it?
Yeah, 300 a week. I think it sort of dropped down to about 400 for 2020 figures.
Yeah.
and then it starts to have a slightly slower recovery. But there could be some research behind this where the government has gone out to manufacturing companies looking at diversifying into sort of the NHS supply chain and sort of materials needed for this.
The equipment.
And there we're seeing sort of a growth back up now to around about the 2018 levels, which for those who can't see is higher than 2019. So at the moment we're looking at around about 660, 670 businesses a week for the past couple of weeks, which is on a par with what 2018 was. Not quite as high as 2019, which was averaging for this time of the year around about sort of 500, 520 companies a week, but still is, interesting to see that a sector that is a measure for the economic strength of the current economy has recovered there. Not something I've seen any media coverage for, any news about, but it is something that when you tie those two together makes an interesting statistic to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And my immediate thought on this was that, are we going to get to the end of the year and actually we're going to have leveled out, still having growth across the course of the year? I mean, however tragic everything has been in the last few weeks and months, it's recovered, hasn't it? From a manufacturing basis, there's that many companies that are setting up in that vertical market that actually it may recover to actually be leveled out across the course of the year, isn't it? I mean, that could continue to go up, or it could plateau out. It's very difficult to say at this minute. Have you got any thoughts on that? I'm not expecting.
I have. I'll come back to that in a minute, because I've got a couple of sort of thoughts on where I sort of see those coming. But this is probably the most eye-catching graph that we look at when you're thinking about diversification or startup businesses as a whole. And so sort of sit it on its own. And this is the sector of internet retail and mail order retail. So literally, when you're looking at sort of hundreds and hundreds of SIC codes, this is narrowing it down to just two, and probably emphasizes beyond any sort of a change in the way of trade in itself. So for those listening in, if we look at 2017, there was around about 300 to 350 companies a week starting up in what I would call the e-commerce sector. So internet retail, sort of drop shipping, sort of mail order kind of businesses. That rose to around about averaging about sort of 500-ish a week through 2018, and 2019 tracked fairly similar to that, around about the 800. And then if we look at just the past month, I'd say that's gone. It never really took a big hit as COVID hit, like all other sectors. It sort of dropped for 2020 from being around about the sort of 640 a week averaging. To when we start to see the drop, it dropped to about 420, 430 for a couple of weeks. And then in the space of about 6 weeks, it has risen at a phenomenal rate to where we're now looking at about 1,300 companies a week being set up in the e-commerce sector. That is higher than is in recorded history of any businesses being set up in any industry sector. No, we've looked back over the past 20 years of data, I'd say, of company registrations, and there has never been a rise of this level that we've been able to find. It's phenomenal, and it really does tie in with a change of way of dealing, way of commerce. And I would say a lot of information behind this is really stemming from when you're looking at sort of retail shops. How can people apart from you going to your supermarkets and your essentials, people aren't really going out and shopping for their commodities, their clothes, so on. So how can businesses both diversify? So I believe there's an aspect to this is diversification, but also if I was planning on going into the retail sector and my original plans were to have a high street presence, that's not going to work for quite some time, I'd imagine. But actually, if I was going to spend all this money on a physical presence, let's invest that into e-commerce. There must be an aspect of that behind here.
Yeah.
But this is the largest measure we've seen of entrepreneurs sort of looking at a current climate, a current situation, and setting businesses up in such a way that cater for the current sort of way of the world, current demand. And this is a bit of an eye-opener when to sort of visualize this, when you can literally see a growth going from what is looking around about 600 a week to more than double that within a space of a few weeks.
It is,
and I don't see any way of that sort of cutting back. I see that continuing for quite a while, potentially even going up even higher. Let's say this is sort of real-time data, so we should see sort of in the next week on week over the coming weeks how that sort of pans out, whether it starts to level out or whether it continues that sort of skyward trajectory.
Yeah, it is phenomenal. Thank you for sharing that information with us, because it certainly creates an idea of much more positivity and entrepreneurship and dealing with the situation. It's not just recovered, it's absolutely boomed. You could argue the fact that there's been a boom in e-commerce startups, couldn't you? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Beyond what you would expect it to be in any case, which is really encouraging.
Yeah, and I think I keep using the term entrepreneurs, but I think that says a lot about the entrepreneurial spirit within the UK, but across other countries. Is that you can't hold them down. It doesn't matter what's going on around the world. It's not because entrepreneurs are dismissive of what's happening, but there is a demand. The world, people still need normality. People still need to buy their widgets, to have a takeaway. It's my wedding anniversary just over a week ago. We ordered some brownies from a local father and son business around here they had a high street store, but they've adapted and gone online to still deliver that, and then delivering the brownies. It sounds something so simple, but diversification. Entrepreneurs, they aren't exploiting, they're helping normality return. And when you look at all the data behind what's going on now, the number of startups that are continuing back to levels we saw pre-COVID, that is entrepreneurs doing their part to bring the economy, to keep the economy churning and helping people return to some form of normality in whatever sectors those are. And e-commerce is the biggest measure of that, because people are, that's how they buy their stuff now.
Yeah. I think, would it be fair to say that, sometimes I think of my friends and I think, would they say that they're entrepreneurs? Is that a label that is put into the Richard Bransons of the world? I think that the way that I reflect upon this is that there are people that maybe wouldn't consider themselves to be entrepreneurs, but they maybe have the entrepreneurial spirit that you're talking about, Richard. So they're saying, well, actually, I'm not just going to sit here and wait for something to land on my lap. I'm going to go out there and hustle and try and make sure that I can find a future. So there's many more people that maybe wouldn't class themselves as entrepreneurs, but have that entrepreneurial spirit, but are actually going out there and doing. They've become new entrepreneurs where they'd never consider themselves to be an entrepreneur. My goddaughter is exactly the same, just out of college, and with all this happening, she's got a business idea. So where she would go and work in a nursery. She had a job in a nursery, all line forward. She's actually using her time at home where she can't work to be able to come up with new business concepts and that sort of thing, which is is refreshing to hear. Really is. Would she have done that if we hadn't been in this situation? I don't honestly think she would. Maybe.
Going back several years ago, I was interviewed for a university project, and they were studying entrepreneurialism, and they asked the question of me, basically, can you teach entrepreneurship? Contentious subject, unpopular opinion. I don't believe you can. I believe entrepreneurs are awakened by an event in their life or in their surroundings.
Nicely put.
I believe you can teach good business, and a good business person can run a very good and successful business. But entrepreneurs are more personal to what they are doing, and will potentially take bigger risks, a bit more problem solving, seeking out, trying to overcome particular challenges. But I think an event makes an entrepreneur. There's sort of almost like a switch inside everybody, and when something happens, it pushes you over that step to the next stage of evolution, to use a term. And this COVID situation may be that trigger for many people who are will sit there and may not have considered starting their own business, but then would see something around them, see the situation, and it could flip that switch and say, I think I can fix that. Whatever that is, I think I can fix that, and I could make a business out of it, a social enterprise, whatever it might be, but I can make something that can help that situation, whatever that situation is.
But then I think as well, it takes, I don't know if the right word is guts, but it takes guts to then actually take that idea. We've all done it, haven't we? Where you go, oh, I've got this great idea, but someone else will have come up with it already. And as a result, you then don't do anything. But I think what these stats show here to me as well are that people are going and doing, that they are being active, and they are going, actually, we're going to put this concept together. We're going to, run at it organically, and see how it goes. And we're going to do this and that and give it a go. And I think that other people that maybe that are on that fringe of should I, shouldn't I, should maybe take these figures and say, others are going for it, you should do the same.
I think you would have a gut feeling. You'd have a feeling of a bit of fire in your belly, and think I can do it. There are some people that running own business doesn't work for them, but there are others that it is just right for, and they will feel it in their gut. That's my belief.
Okay, so Richard, thank you very much for sharing that data with us. Incredibly refreshing and positive. So, have you got any reasonable estimations about how this will continue going forward? Is it? I appreciate it's not easy to do that, but reasonably, can you make any estimations?
The history tells us that as we come out of a recession, and it's been consistent with the past recession, there's always been a small spike in the number of people setting up in businesses. There'll be an aspect to that which will be businesses resurrecting, phoenixing, just sort of basically getting back up and running. There's an aspect which we mentioned earlier about people who have been made redundant, who may have redundancy money or be taking that opportunity to set a business up in itself anyway. But then what we've got coming out of this situation right now is an announcement that when the furlough scheme was announced, the Treasurer, Chancellor, get the name right, they announced that there will be some realignment of tax treatment for people who are registered as sole traders, where if you're on PAYE or corporation tax, you pay a much higher level of tax as a company than you potentially do as a sole trader. And that's become very apparent during the rescue schemes that have come out here. Quite a consistent opinion from what I've been reading, that there will be a transition of people who are sole traders will be moving their business into a incorporated company, limited company, as well as generally if you're an accountant and you're advising somebody about starting their own business, and you've got the choice in front of be a sole trader or be a limited company, and there is no tax advantage between either of them, then you would naturally take the view of taking the limited protection, the limited liability that a company provides you. So putting all those together, recovery from a recession, a change in tax planning or tax handling between sole traders and limited companies, I believe that there will be quite a huge growth in a number of limited companies going forward as we get towards the end of this year and then going forward. Like the change we saw earlier between 2017 and 2018, where the number of limited companies almost doubled. it wouldn't surprise me if we saw another similar growth going forward into next year, as the number of people setting up as limited companies significantly rises as a number of sole traders decreases. So yeah, that's the way I see sort of things playing out. Time frames, crystal ball, but it really does depend on the recovery. We've already seen that the number of companies starting up is restored back to sort of pre-COVID levels. If I was to put a number on it, I'd probably say by the time we come out of the summer holidays, when children realistically may start going back to school around September time, that's when I would envisage starting to see a large spike in the number of limited companies starting up.
Cool. So in terms of the reflection upon this, is that, you know, we should be positive that the company, the business community is recovering in general. Certain areas are still going to struggle, I get that, but it seems refreshing to me that they are changing and adapting and evolving to meet the demand that's out there, and weren't just always doing it the way they've always done it because they always have. So, and then there, like you say, it's a change in legislation and guidance that potentially that will even encourage that more so towards maybe the latter end of the year. Okay, so one last question, if you don't mind me asking, more so from a business owner point of view. I mean, this whole process has been a learning curve for us all, I think, both personally and also from a business basis. Is there any advice that you can pass on as a business owner to, you know, I believe that you've had to furlough some of your staff, so you've been affected by that. You've had to evolve and adapt, as you told us earlier in the outbreak, that you've had to try and change based upon listening to your customer feedback, that there was pockets of opportunity that you would be best to try and follow. What advice could you give other business owners that you've learned out of this 3-4 months of unprecedented times?
I'll give two bits, one purely from the business perspective and then one from a more softer business perspective.
Okay.
I think the first one is definitely be open-minded to diversifying. Don't be afraid to try something, not recklessly, but if there's a hint of something that you may not have considered from your business, and this idea can come from staff, it can come from customers, suppliers, or just listening. Look at ways you can diversify now more than ever. We've had a tried and tested model that's worked with us well for years and years, and this situation highlighted how reliant we were on one aspect of our business, and when that dropped suddenly, it really highlighted why we needed to diversify more than ever. It's always been in the back of our minds, but not to the level that this is highlighted. So don't be afraid to try new things. The more sort of softer aspect of the business would be the staff. It's a whole cliche that a business is its staff, but what I found is some of my time where you would all be within an office environment talking to each other, being mindful that your team are working in isolated environments more now than ever. So fire up a Zoom chat or something like that, a virtual conversation with colleagues, ask how they are. There has been a lot on social media about well-being and looking after your team. It is important. Be mindful of how they feel. They're going to be worried about their jobs. They're going to be worried about the business. They're going to be feeling quite detached and isolated from their colleagues. So as a business owner, it's your duty to do what you can to bring them all together and create that social environment that existed before within an office that might not exist so well working remotely. Working remote's great, but it has its challenges. I'm sat within an office on my own here now, as sure you are, all doing this virtually. It'd be different if we were sat in within the team where you could say, how was your weekend? That doesn't come naturally through a video call. But
you've still got to invest in doing that, haven't you? You've got to make the effort to do that, because otherwise you just become introverted and may struggle.
Yeah, and as I see it as the business owner's duty to make sure that happens.
Yeah, I agree. If anybody wants to get hold of Richard or I, then by all means go to Business Data Group on LinkedIn, all types of social media, as well as a website. And also from my point of view, CoCredo across all our platforms. So thank you very much. I'll let you enjoy the rest of the sunshine that is out there today.
Brilliant.
Take care.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Cheers.